Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our Facebook Live all about time and range. Before we get started, my name is Cherise Shockley. I am the community manager for the diaTribe Foundation, and I would like to thank our sponsors for this, which is Novo Nordisk and Merck. So, thank you all for making this happen. And I am really excited. Usually I have like a nice spiel and a welcome, but we have a lot of questions that we want to get to today. So I am joined by Shay, who is in the yellow shirt, and Julia, who is in the pink blazer. So Shay, Julia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us, Cherise.
Yeah,
You're
excited
very
to be here.
good. So we're going to start with Julia. Julia, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be fantastic. And your connection to diabetes.
All right, I will try to keep this as quick as possible. So, my name's Julia. I've lived with type 1 diabetes for almost 23 years now. I've been on an insulin pump for over 21 years, and I've been on a CGM for about, I don't know how long now, since 2014. So, however many years that is. I'm a diabetes care and education specialist, and I'm also a nurse scientist, and that work that I do is also with people with diabetes, and I also have family members who have type 2 diabetes. So I kind of have a lot of diabetes connections. I kind of span the whole space, I feel like. So I'm happy to be here, though. I'm really excited.
Oh, wow. So you actually have a lot of things going in the diabetes space. So we're going to come back and circle because that's going to be a part of our diabetes burnout section. So we'll come back to
Awesome.
that. Shay, a little bit about you. Hey, Jay, thank you for joining in.
Sure. So I'm Shay. I've had T1D since I was 8 years old. So November 5th, 2007 is my diversity. And I have been on a pump since 2009. And I've been on a CGM since 2019, I believe, at this point. So I'm fairly new to that compared to Julia, but I have enjoyed the experience nevertheless. In addition to the advocacy that I do within the diabetes sector, I've been able to be a Next Gen Fellow with the College Diabetes Network, in addition to a young leader with the Diabetes Research Institute Foundation. And it's been a great joy just to see everyone as you just grow with everyone, especially starting back at JDRF as a gala ambassador and mentor, and just to come up from here.
Wow, this is crazy. So, first of all, I guess this is probably a very good conversation for the two of you because you're busy. I mean, Julia's busy with research. Shay, you're busy with your graduate program. You're busy with all your volunteer endeavors. So I think for me, where I would like to start off, because there may be some people who may be joining us who has CGM, whether it's Dexcom, Libre, or Eversense. Julia, what is time and range?
Awesome. I love this question. So time in range is the time that you spend, that your blood glucose is between your target numbers. So for most people, it's between 70 and 180. And the time in that range for a lot of people is we aim for over 70%, but other people will aim for over 50%, especially if you're at high risk of lows or anything like that. So, yeah.
Well, cool. My dog is barking. Sorry about that. So, Shay, when were you introduced to time and range?
So I feel like it was almost an interesting piece to that question because I would see it as a child with my pediatric endocrinologist, but I didn't exactly know what they were talking about. But then with my transition to different pumps and to different machines, I finally just, kind of stumbled upon it one day, and I could see, like my percentage in within this range, or how many times I'm high or low. And I just kind of started using it almost as a grading scale in a way, because I'm like, I didn't know that I was, at least I can say now I give myself more credit, because I look at my time in range or my time in target, and I notice that I'm in range more than I think I am. So it's like, okay, you have maybe 57% one week, or you may have 60%, or some weeks aren't as great. You might have been sick, you may have 40%. And it just, it came at a different time. So I would say I was introduced to it at a young age, but I began to use it myself when I got older.
Nice. So did your doctor or okay, I know this is later on, but just did your health professional talk to you about time range?
I would think so. I feel like when we talk about time and range, it was just like you print out the spreadsheet. Here's your numbers. Here's the numbers in red. Here's the numbers in orange. And it's like it's given to you, but I don't think it was really addressed. So I was shown it, but it wasn't talked about.
So, which brings me to Julia. How do you introduce people to time and range? I mean, they get this nice flashy CGM or insulin pump. Can you, I know we don't have a lot of time, but can you break it down to us on how you introduce people to time and range?
Yeah, so a lot of times when I'm first introducing time and range, it's because I had just trained someone how to use a CGM, or trained them, like onboarding them to their insulin pump, and I want to review their data with them to see how things are going and to see what we can kind of tweak to optimize their care for them. And so I usually introduce it. I'll print out the report, which for some people, you know, I always ask, is it okay if we look at your data, because it can be overwhelming, right? And then I'll kind of like walk them through everything. So I'll say, this is time and range. So we're trying to optimize the time green, and we're trying to minimize the time red. I always talk about the lows before talking about the really highs there. And I explain that, so, you know, for you, we're trying to optimize that time and range to at least 70%. Either they're already there, and I say, look, you're already here, so let's just make sure you're not having lows. Let's make sure everything's going okay for you. Let's see like what questions or issues you see yourself, like if they're swinging a lot after meals from spikes or anything like that. So I kind of like explaining it in action. But there are times when I've had patients talk about A1C and about how they're stuck at, you know, they're stuck at an 8.5, for example, A1C, and they're really fixated on that number. And I always, like, if they have CGM, I always use that as an opportunity to switch gears and to talk about, well, so let's take a look at everything and see what we can do to try to optimize the time you're spending in the 70 to 180 range. And then that in turn should help with your A1C. But I always tell them A1C, like it's outdated, guys. It's no longer the focus. Like, we have so many more tools now. And with these tools, we can actually, it shows actionable, what we can do that's actionable, right? So when you see your A1C and it's 8.5, there's not a lot you can do from that. But looking at all of the data points with CGM and then looking at the time and range in comparison to that, it gives you something actionable. And that's what I always focus on.
So what's the reaction when you go from time and range to, well, from A1C? And Shay, I'm going to come back to you as well after Julia, because as a person with diabetes, right, for so many years, you're trained, right? And I know I use the word trained to really pay attention to the A1C. So as CGMs evolve and they get better, the more information that they can provide. So what's the reaction when you're like, hey, did you know about time and range?
A lot of people have never heard of it. And so, you know, a lot of times they'll see either a primary care provider or a diabetes clinician before seeing me. And so it makes me kind of sad. Like, some people have been seeing the same clinician for years and years and years. And people should know, like, they're prescribing these technologies. Like, why aren't they talking about time and range? And so a lot of times people say to me, well, how come I've never heard of it? And I'll say, well, it's a new trend. Like, we're moving this, like, I'll kind of, like, instead of focusing on why they haven't heard of it, I'll kind of be like, you've heard of it now. Let's go with it. Like, and I always kind of just explain to them that, you know, it's something that gives us something actionable, and it gives us like something to make progress from, right? Like, opposed to just looking at the A1C and not really knowing the specifics of what to change. And it's usually pretty well accepted when I explain it that way.
And Shay, so what was your reaction when you was like, oh, this right here? Okay, so did it improve? Did it improve how you manage your diabetes? Because I know with A1C, you kind of had to wait until you had the A1C drawn, and then you make decisions based off of that 3-month, test result, or if you sometimes go every 6 months. So how did that work out for you?
I mean, I would say it did, because one thing I noticed with the A1C, you could go sometimes and it'd be like, yes, my A1C dropped, but I'm having like all these lows. And people don't talk about that part as, something that contributes, because these are averages. But when you have like your time in target and your time in range, and you look and you're like, okay, the well, for like Julia was saying, 70 to 180, mine's actually 70 to 170. So when I see that bar and it's, all the way green, rather than the below 70 isn't all the way red, it makes me think like, okay, going in the right direction. This is okay. And it actually breaks down where and what time do I need to focus on the most, because I feel like with A1C, it was just a blanket. So time and target, it's more so, okay, it may be from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. You're spiking up or you're dropping really low. So I know, okay, I need to increase my temp basal, or I need to tell my endocrinologist this is what's going on. Maybe this is something we need to go through. And all of that to say, it's just made things so much more precise. So diabetes itself and management is already hard enough as is for people. So when you actually have answers to point you in the right direction, it makes things a lot more manageable.
Ooh, I like that. When you actually have answers to point you in the right direction. That time and range. Oh, you should totally put that on a t-shirt. That's actually a very good quote. So Julia, I know that some people, and we've heard it. I mean, we see it on social. You've heard it in offices, in your office. How can people actually have the conversation with their doctor or a practitioner about time and range? Because for me, my endocrinologist, he actually prints out, my Dexcom reports, and we go through them. So, but what if there's someone who knows that time and range exists, but aren't too sure about stepping on their doctor's toes or question their intelligence? How can they have that conversation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually get that question a lot from a lot of my friends who have type 1 diabetes. I have a ton of friends from diabetes camp and other various things about my age that live with type 1 diabetes as well. And they see all sorts of providers, right, for their diabetes. And what I usually say in that situation, if someone's frustrated and they have a clinician who isn't looking at A1C and they're not really helping them make the right adjustments that they feel they need, I always say, why don't you just print your report? Like, just print your report with the time and range on it, with the 70 to 180 range, and then bring it to your appointment. And that's one thing you can discuss. You can say, look, I'm trending pretty low, like I'm too low at certain times. Let's take a further look into the daily reports and actually see when I'm going low and what we can do to fix it. Like, so it kind of, you can use it as a way to empower yourself to bring up more specific details with clinicians who might be very busy and rushed, or who might not bring up time and range.
Totally makes sense. And Shay, do you have any insight, as a person with diabetes, how do you have that conversation?
Luckily, I'm at a point now where my endocrinologist is amazing. So I feel like I would be comfortable enough to have that conversation, or more so like, okay, we need to look and see what's going on. Because as you said before, like, I'm really active, but my activity levels are shifting all the time. So either I'll, stay at the gym as being active, or I'll be like running to every meeting in the book as staying active. And both of those require different types of management and different treatment options. So one might be like, okay, I'm busy, but I'm in a Zoom meeting all day. So I'm going to be seated. I'm not going to be moving. My blood sugar is going to be high. I need to do something about that. So my time in range for, above 170 is going to be probably through the roof. Compared to when I'm going to the gym, you know how that goes. Sometimes it's going to drop, sometimes it's not. So you might have more of your normal numbers and lower numbers. So it's just about like being transparent with your physician. That's very important. But then I can also acknowledge too, like on the other side of what Julia was saying, sometimes it's intimidating to address this with your physician. And in addition to that, not only is it intimidating, but it's like you have younger people like myself. We're in school, we're working, we're in class. We're not always going to think about printing off our sheets and bringing it to our visits. So I think in addition to your physician that you're trying to explain things to, also have your support group of health professionals. So have the physician included, have the nurse practitioner, the diabetes educator. Just, it doesn't have to be like a resume list of people, but just people you feel comfortable with. And they don't even have to work at your doctor's office all the time, but because practically all of us know some type of healthcare worker. And as long as, like they're good to go, they have all of their certifications, they're really good to tell you some type of information, you can use information from different sources, not prescription information, but like like information that's going to help you.
Yes, I definitely agree. So I know this question is for both of you all. People with diabetes, like I said earlier, we condition ourselves. A1C is a grade. A1C is end all, be all. Is time in range or even A1C, is it a grade?
It's so toxic when you start looking at it like a grade. And you need to think about, there's a lot of factors, right? And I think people are not kind enough to themselves sometimes and take things really, really harshly. But like, if your A1C goes up or your time in range goes down because you were sick and on steroids for a 4-week period, like you have to be kind to yourself about that, right? Or if you're like Shay, like when I was in grad school, my time in range was not what it is now, right? Because my life was crazy and I was stressed, but you know what? Like I accepted that I was doing the best I could. And I know not everyone has the energy to reframe like that all the time. And I'm going on a tangent now, but I just think we can't look at it like a report card because it just turns so toxic, and that can really impact the way that people are able to contribute to their own self-management and the energy that you have to put into it. So I like time in range because I don't look at it as a report card. I look at it as, hey, what's one small thing we can do to optimize how you feel and to optimize your well-being and your quality of life?
Yeah. It's hard though.
It is. It's interesting because I have a similar approach, but it's like I think of it as a grade, but I don't. And this is the reason being is because A1C, you feel like that's your report card. That is like what you're coming home with. I feel like time and range, I almost look at it as that progress report. So like we all had to get those intern reports while we were in school, and it showed us where we're going before we get there. But either way, you're not passing a grade. You're not going to class. You're not graduating from diabetes. So either way you put it, it's not going to be the end all be all. So you're going to have days where you slip up, where things aren't all in the right percentages, but that's okay, because like the intern report, it's warning you before you get to the place where you can't come back from. It's actually showing you the improvements you need to make. So you have all your assignments listed back in grade school. You made this grade on this assignment. You might want to study this a little harder for the test before, like you have something really important you want to do. I feel like that's what time and range is. It's like narrowing down, like, okay, nobody's perfect, but we're going to mold you so that you're going to feel well enough to do what you want to do.
Ooh, so I like that. So Julia, the two different approaches. I like how you actually, Shay, just broke down if you were to take that grade approach, and how you said this is pretty much preparing you for that result that you're trying to get. And Julia, you mentioned, stop being so hard on yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, diabetes is not going anywhere anytime soon, and we have to give ourselves grace. So I think that we have to remember grace, and every day is going to be different. Different situations is going to give you different results. So I know we keep mentioning time in target and time in range. So Julie, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit.
Oh, great.
Okay, so if someone who might be watching, who might not be familiar with time and range, and they have a Dexcom CGM, what is it called for Dexcom?
So I believe it's the time and range. They have the time and range report, and then you access it through. You have to download the Clarity app, or you have to plug it into the computer to see that Clarity report. And then there's the ambulatory glucose profile, which is another good resource on there as well, which kind of breaks everything down.
Okay, and then for the Libre.
Yep. For the Libre, I also think they use the time and range. I don't know. I know Shay, a lot of things.
I was about to say Shay's shaking.
Oh no, Shay says time and target. Time and target is that they use. I was gonna say I know a lot of things off the top of my head, but I don't seem to know those two, like what the actual verbiage is off the top of my head for that. I thought I did a second ago, but I don't. And so for that, you can get the same type of looking report that gives you can look at the ambulatory glucose profile. That's a really nice overview of the time. I think it automatically populates between 70 and 180. And then it shows the time that you're low and like between 55 and 70 and then under 55. And then it shows the time that you're between 180 and 250 and over 250. And I think both Dexcom and Libre have the ambulatory glucose profile. And I believe that other CGMs have that as well. So I know Medtronic does. I haven't looked at an Eversense report in the past year or so, but I believe they have that as well.
Okay. So from a clinician point of view, and also I want to hear the two sides of you, Julia, and then also Shay, what advice would you all have for people who may be anxious or sad as they're preparing for their 3-month visit with their clinician?
So here I am. I'm going to sound so annoyingly positive, but what I recommend to do is if you're feeling down, try your best to think about something positive. So maybe, you were in my situation where grad school is really stressful, but I finally passed my one really big exam, right? So this is a true story. I went to my endo that semester and I said, look, I know I'm trying to avoid negative words. I'm not as optimized as I usually am. I don't have like that time and range I usually do, but I finally passed that test and my stress is now minimized. And so thinking about what you can talk about, what you did well related to diabetes or not, if it was something personal that could have then, indirectly affected your diabetes, I think can be a really helpful tactic. It can be really, really scary and disheartening, like going into that office, just thinking and dreading that you don't have the results that you want. But I think, you really need to think about, well, maybe my life is difficult right now, but here's what I'm doing well. And let's take a look at my time and range and reflect on it with someone who can help me.
Oh, I like that. What about you, Shay?
I think something similar, if you're feeling kind of down about those things, you can write out a list of things that you've done in that past span, whether it's 3 months or 6 months or however long it's been, and just tell yourself, wow, this may not have gone well, but I did A, B, and C, or even if it's just A, you did something that you should be proud of. And even if that's just, I took a self-care day and I rested, I took care of myself, that takes a lot, especially nowadays, especially with diabetes, because those type of things impact us so much. But I can take it from my own point of view and perspective. Usually when I have my endocrinologist appointments, especially when I was back in school, and technically I'm in grad school too, so it still counts. But
I'm gonna say, aren't you?
Still in school.
But it's like I always make this habit because I have to drive across town to go to my doctor's office or drive at the end of the street for labs or something. But I do something afterwards that I'm looking forward to. So if things went well, okay, celebrate. If things didn't go well, that's still fine too. You know, I'm still pushing on. And it's like that failing feeling, that no feeling, that just means next opportunity. So that just means you might have messed up, you get back up, keep on going. And for me personally, for anybody who knows me, they know I do this by heart, but I will leave my endocrinologist appointment and stop by Starbucks and get some coffee or whatever drink I want, just to be like, you know what, this isn't easy. And I also got up really early for this, which I don't do anyway. So I'm celebrating everything, all the little things, even if it's something as small as that.
Yeah, treat yourself.
Yeah, treat yourself. But I think it's all about framing, right? It's so we know, like, for instance, one time I went and I was beating myself. I'm like, Dr. P, my A1C is going to be off the charts because I haven't been focused on it. Like, I've been focused, and this is when I was in school. I've been focused on school. He was like, my job is not to beat you up. My job is to help you get to where you want to be. I'm your partner. That's how I want you to look at this. So stop beating yourself up. So I think oftentimes we beat ourselves up before giving our healthcare provider, our clinician, that opportunity to help us and not scold us, right?
Yeah, honestly, sometimes, especially when I got to my new endocrinologist, when I had just started college, I was almost preparing myself like, oh my goodness, okay, I'm going to be in here for, I don't know how long, I'm going to hear X, Y, and Z. I just wanted to go in and get it over with. And then I go in there and it's like, oh, so this is your A1C. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, go home, go study. And I'm like, wait, that was it? Like, I was stressing for what? Like, you know, sometimes we beat ourselves up more than they beat ourselves up. And it's like, you know, you would think it would be the opposite, because a lot of times people think you go to your clinician and it's just going to be textbook talk, but not everyone is, you know, one size fits all. If you get someone who's really on your team and makes you feel comfortable, that's a gem as itself.
Definitely. So let's talk about burnout, because we know, and I think we cannot have this conversation without talking about alarm fatigue and burnout. Shay, do you experience burnout, and what steps do you take to get yourself out? Because I think we all do to a certain extent. It's just making sure we don't sit and stay in that phase.
Yes. So honestly, how I get myself out of it is to let myself be in it. So to accept that burnout is real, to have that time to be frustrated, to cry if I need to talk to my support groups, talk to my friends, like, okay, this is insane sometimes. But then it's like, once you start talking sometimes, you start to look at the good things and you start to listen to the funny things that, you know, the burnout may have caused. Because like I can say, for one of my friends who has T1D, we were shopping the other day, and while everyone else was just like looking at a purse, we're like, so can we fit our CGM in here? Can you fit your pods in here? And we actually ended up going out. I'm like, okay, I know you haven't left yet, but can you like bring a box of pens? That would be awesome. And it's just, you start looking at all the good things that come out of that one bad moment. And it just, for me, it empowers me to do even more, because I mean, as you know, Cherise, I was busy in college and I'm busy now, but I feel like it's more so, rather than busyness, I feel like it's empowerment, because I know what people think of for T1Ds and those with diabetes, or even those of color. Like, you know, you have the stigma that because there's a higher increase for depression, obviously they all act like that. Right. So you're going to be like, that person doesn't really do much, not as active. Whereas you see, like, some of us, we're out here, we're involved on campus, we're involved in the community, and next thing you know, you don't think anyone's watching you, but you have this person with diabetes who just got diagnosed, or who may be younger than you, and you're helping them along just by being yourself. So, burnout is real. And that's one thing to say, like, with the busyness talk and all that, that's a part of you. So is burnout, but it's not all of you. So maybe a trait, but it's not your name.
Oh, I like that. Also, we have someone who's newly diagnosed, Rena. Hi, Rena. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to come back to your question in a few minutes because I want to hear from Julia, because Julia, not only does she live with it, she works in it. She goes and volunteers at camps. She's a researcher in the field of diabetes. How do you deal with burnout, and how do you help your patients deal and work through burnout?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of layers to this. The first thing, and I'm always going to say this, be kind to yourself. That's the bottom line. When something isn't going the way you plan, if your blood sugar is spiking, your sight is bad, it doesn't help if you let it really get to you, right? Like, those are the moments that I really had to learn to work through. There's like little frustrating moments. So that's thing number one. But thing number two is that, find your support system. For me, I'm really fortunate that I have a lot of friends that live with diabetes. If you don't know anyone else with diabetes, try to get involved. Either there's a ton of social media support on various platforms where you can meet other people, but also just like find someone that you can really kind of talk about your feelings with, whether that be like your partner or a family member, if you don't know someone with diabetes or you're not ready yet to like connect with others. So that too. And then the last thing that, so I personally experienced some burnout when I was doing my BSN in nursing in undergrad. And I went to my diabetes clinician and I was like in tears with my highest A1C ever, because A1C was the focus. And she was really like, she really kind of talked me down and was like, you need to think about all the things you're doing right now. You're trying to adjust to life as an adult, like working nursing shifts. And, that was when she was like, let's try CGM and look more at your data. And so since then, I've really used that approach though with my patients, where if someone comes in extremely overwhelmed and burnt out, I'll really just be like, let's take a step back. Like, you're doing a great job. Let's look at everything kind of piece by piece and like set small goals. So working with a diabetes care and education specialist or a diabetes clinician who can help you set those small goals and break it down and help you get through it. Because if you're really stuck, like you're gonna keep feeling overwhelmed and you're gonna keep staying stuck until someone helps you get out of it, right? So, I mean, sometimes you can get yourself out of it, but I find, and I know a lot of my patients find, that it's really helpful to have someone they can work with to like set those small goals and to check in and to kind of work through that. So
totally makes sense. So this conversation has been pretty heavy on CGM and pump conversations. So Julia, if someone out there who's listening to us right now or may listen to this later and they use BGM, how can they measure their time in range?
Yeah, so I love data. Yay. Okay, so before CGM exploded and so many people started using it, we used to look at blood sugar reports on things like DiaSend and Gluco and Tidepool, right? Well, Tidepool is newer, but it's another platform you can do that. Or even just through the meter that you use, there might be an app or platform where you can see all of your blood sugars. So you can use any of those data download platforms to look at your data, even if it's on a meter, right? And so the more times you check your blood sugar throughout the day, the more data you'll have. So it'll give you kind of a closer approximation to what your time in range is. Although, you're not going to have over 250 data points like you would with a CGM. You may only have 7 data points for each day. It is also good that if you're looking at your time in range and you're checking with fingerstick, that you do some checks like a couple hours after you eat to get kind of like a post-meal glucose in there or two, and then also to kind of to check fasting and to kind of just like check at different times that wouldn't necessarily be captured if you were just checking when you wake up and before meals. So like a couple in there after meals, if you have enough test strips for that, would be ideal too. And then you would upload your meter to either one of the apps or one of those data platforms, and it'll give you the same type of report that you would get if you had CGM data in there, and it'll show you how much you're in the green and how much you are above or below the 70 to 180 target range. And it's not as much data, so you really need to look at it over a 2-week period. You can't just look at a few days. Same goes for CGM though. The longer period, the better. So 14 days is recommended for both too. So
thank you, because I know oftentimes we sit on social and we see like everyone posting their CGM, and it's like, but what about the people who don't have access, or people with type 2 diabetes who, they are having hurdles with their insurance company trying to get one approved? So I wanted to make sure that we touched on that a little bit, just for those who don't have a CGM at this time. So Julie, another quick question for you. I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but we know that with A1C, they recommend that everyone is under 7. Mm-hmm. How does that actually translate into time and range? Because I know a lot of people are like, well, A1C, time and range. Can you kind of give us a little math lesson on that?
Yeah, so these really awesome clinician scientists did a lot of work in this area, and what they've come up with the international group on time and range has come up with is that 70% time and range is the best equivalent to under a 7% A1C. And then for the people that might have a higher risk of low blood sugars or have other comorbidities, over 50% time and range would equal under an 8 A1C. So those are kind of the two markers that we use. So over 70% and over 50% for the under 7 and under 8.
Thank you. And so, Shay, do you work with your healthcare provider, or your clinician, or some people see diabetes care and education specialists? Do you work with them to help with your time and range goals? Because I know the standard is the 70, percent, but sometimes some people, depending on if they're, going through pregnancy or on steroids, their ranges may be different. Do you work with your clinician during different life stages to come up with what that should actually look like for you?
Definitely. And I've actually gone through some of those stages, because when I got to college, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. So that calls for, some days you might have to do those steroid shots and, have to address things that way. And with comorbidity, you're addressing one thing, and then your diabetes also has to get addressed. So it's like a balancing act in a way. But honestly, sometimes, and everyone is different, but for me, depending on what year it is, what my focus is on, I will make it as like my New Year's resolution in a way. Like, okay, this is what I want to start with. And if I can get close to it, whatever steps I need to make, if I need to change it throughout the year, this is what I want my end goal to be. So it's almost like, by the time you get there, you're looking at the light at the end of the tunnel, or, you're at least going in the direction. So some people want to do weight loss, some people want to improve their A1C. And honestly, what I've noticed is by working with my clinician, sometimes it's really simple things that don't need basal adjustments, that don't need, bolus adjustments. It can just be something as simple as taking your insulin before you eat rather than after you eat, or making sure you check your sensor or your blood sugar with your BGM a certain amount of times before you exercise, before you're going to be still for a long period of time. So I think just establishing that transparency with my clinician was the most important part. So I tell her, like, okay, this is what I want to do. However, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and I don't want to, go nuts. So please help. So, she's really amazing for that.
It sounds like your clinician's amazing. Julia, how do you work with people?
So, I usually have them. Okay, so honestly, I'm going to be honest. I am so used to looking at 70 to 180 when I'm helping identify patterns that I personally like setting the report to 70 to 180. However, the targets that patients set are really up to their needs, right? So if they're running a lot higher, I'm not going to have them set their high limit to 180 on their actual CGM device, right? So I may set that on the report just to kind of understand where everything's at, but it really is about what your needs are, and then like gradually over time we'll lower the higher target to maybe 180. For pregnancy, the targets are totally different. They're much lower. So that's a whole different ball game.
We'll have to have you back for that conversation.
Yeah. So those targets are much lower. Would actually be considered quite in the low range sometimes for somebody who's using the 70 to 180 target. So that's totally different. But, standard, I usually look at the report 70 to 180, but I have the, whatever you want to set your high and low range to. The low range is really what's comfortable, what will give you the least anxiety. And the high range is really something that's actionable and that won't annoy you. So like I personally had my high range myself has been the point where I think it's appropriate, and then it's driving me up the wall insane to the point where I'm losing sleep. And that's sometimes I'll have to increase it a little bit for a few days to prevent that burnout myself. But yes, the reports I do 70 to 180 unless pregnant. Just the time we want to spend there can be different depending on the situation.
I just had to yell for help because my dog is barking while we're trying to talk. So this has been a fantastic conversation, and we have time left. So what I want to do is, it looks like there are plenty of people talking in the chat. So it looks like there's a question from Julie, and she says, of course, Shay, she's sorry to hear about your arthritis, but she's curious, how long do the steroids actually impact your blood sugar?
Honestly, it depends. And because there's so many different types. So with me, like when I first got it, I had to kind of get an emergency shot. So I got it one time and it was like one and done. And then I got transitioned to the pills. And I would say it didn't affect it too much, but I feel like that's because when I got the shot and when I got put on this medication, it was drilled into me like, okay, at least for the rest of the day or the next 2 to 3 days, you need to watch your blood sugar like very closely, very much. So I was always, kind of cognizant to look on my pump to notice if it was going up. And I would see some increases. It might have lasted half a week or so because it was, still in my system. And it was also new to my body because I had never had anything like this before. But I'd say as I've grown used to those type of medications, especially like pills, my body's, I guess it's rerouted itself. It's adjusted a little bit more. So I don't see those complications, those spikes as much as I used to. So things are much more streamlined. But in general, I literally think that answer would depend on one, what type of, steroid and medication they're giving you, and two, like your comorbidity.
Definitely. And Julia, there's a part of and I know this is in Dexcom, and I'm pretty sure it will be everywhere else, but no one ever really talks about standard deviation.
Oh, I'm a research person, so I'm all about numbers. Okay.
Yes. So for me, we had this series through diaTribe last year where we actually had, the top diabetes center in Minnesota kind of go through the I can't say the word, the profile. And
ambulatory glucose profile.
Yes. They need to come up with a better term for that.
AGP
for the AGP report. And I was so fixated on standard deviation. And I also luckily had the opportunity to hear a researcher talk about it. No, it wasn't a researcher. It was Diana Isaacs talked about it at an ADA event. And can you explain what that standard deviation is? Because for me, if I'm 90% in range and my standard deviation is 50, I freak out because I want it to be as tight as possible. So can you explain that?
Yeah, okay, so standard deviation is actually one of these things. You really have to look at your average blood glucose to understand where your standard deviation's at. So standard deviation, it's looking at all of, I'm trying to break this down in a way that'll make sense, but it's basically a number that looks at kind of the differences in blood sugars over time there, and it really is, it's based on that mean number, so the average glucose. So
I'm gonna share this so people can see if you have a Dexcom.
Yeah. So the higher your mean glucose is, the higher you could expect your standard deviation to be. And then the lower your mean glucose is, the lower you would expect your standard deviation to be. And it's really hard to gauge what's low variability versus high. But I have read quite a bit of research. So people without diabetes that don't have big glucose swings up and down, they like standard deviation is usually under 25. So that's someone who doesn't have an A1C that's in the diabetes range. So you can imagine their blood sugars are running like much lower than people even with an A1C in the sixes, right? So these are people that haven't been diagnosed with diabetes or pre-diabetes. So if you look at it that way, you kind of have to look what is my average number, and then where is the standard deviation? How much am I swinging up and down? And coefficient of variation is another one that you can look at, and actually that's not so much based on your mean glucose, and that the goal is under 36%. And that, I don't know if it shows up on all of the AGP reports, but you can look at that metric in the Dexcom app and in the Libre app for sure. So.
Well, thank you. And y'all, if you all have any questions that's listening for Julia Shay, please feel free to put them in the chat, because I have a lot of questions and I'll keep going. So I want to make sure that we use this opportunity to take advantage to ask our panelists questions. Julia Shay, quick question. Is there something that I didn't ask that you all want to share?
Well, someone just asked me a question.
Oh, yes, I see it. Do you have 2 to 3 general tips for patients as a starting point if folks want to improve their time in range?
Yeah, so my biggest tip is to see where you're at. So you want to look at a 14-day period. You want to look at the ambulatory glucose report, and you want to set the time in range, unless you're pregnant, to 70 to 180. And just do 2 weeks, live your normal life, see where you're at. And then from there, you kind of can look, do I have a lot of variability?
Rena wants to know standard deviation. She says, should it be less than 36%?
That's the coefficient of variation. So that's the one that doesn't depend as much on your mean glucose. And then standard deviation.
Oh, anything that I asked that or forgot to ask, or anything that you want to share that we didn't discuss?
Well, I was actually looking through the chat, and something I noticed, I think it might have been from Julie, or maybe might have been from Renee, someone in the chat, but they were asking about actually, we talk about time and target and time and range, but if you can't have it actually sticking to your arm, it's not going to do you much good. And I think the biggest recommendation I've seen, because honestly, what I've seen that's put in the chat, I can relate to completely, because you might have your sensor on 4 days or 6 days and it comes off out of the 14. And it's just to find an adhesive that is good for you. So like to put on originally, so clean off your site, put on, for me, I put on Mastazole, and I get it really tacky, really sticky. But what I've noticed is I can't rush the process. I have to really make sure it dries before I put anything else on, or else, even though it's glue you're putting on your skin, it'll still come off. So I will stand beside a fan or blow on it or whatever I need to, and make sure it's dry enough. Put my site on, use the same adhesive that I used before I use my overlay, and put it over the site. And then put your overlay on and put more adhesive over the site. And this is just coming from a person who lives in North Carolina. It's always hot, always sweating, and I'm always moving. And, that saved me a lot of pods, and it saved me a lot of sensors. So, it may be something worth trying.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know that I use a Dexcom, and sometimes, like, if you have issues, they have patches that if you call them, they will actually send you some overlays if you don't have them. Hi, Julia.
But can you hear me?
I can
Yes,
see you.
we can
You
see
can
and
see
hear
me?
you.
No, I'm scared.
So are there any other questions? It looks like also Jay also mentioned that to get the basals like really on point,
Yeah,
starting out is key.
yeah,
So since we're talking about basal testing, right? So that's something that I don't hear a lot of people talk about anymore, and which is highly recommended. When I was trying to figure out my settings, the basal testing came into play. So what does that actually look like?
yeah. So it can be a pain in the butt, but it's really important to do because, especially if you are trying to maximize your time in range, you need to figure out what your body actually needs, right? So you try to minimize all of the external factors you can, and you're going to look at what your blood sugars are during that period. So fasting is super easy because you wake up, and if you're running high a few days in a row fasting, that's an indication that your overnight basal is not aggressive enough. If you're running low, it's an indication that it's too aggressive, right? But during the day is when it gets trickier because you really have to minimize the other factors to understand what your basal should be. So fasting for like blocks of time and trying not to do like any intense exercise, trying to do it when you're not sick, you're not stressed about something, and then just seeing if your blood sugars are in range during that time when you're minimizing all of the external factors you can think of. And if they're not, then that's a good indication that your basal needs to be changed.
Thank you. Because let's see, are you saying, oh, here's another question back to skin tack. Are you saying it is okay to put skin tack on before your sensor and then on top of the sensor and then put Dexcom over the patch?
That's what I do. That's what I do. But when you put it on first, you have to do the donut hole. You don't want to get the skin tack in the middle because it can interfere with the sensor when it's inserted. So donut hole. And then I have the skin tack with like the little like swab on the bottom, and I like swab it around, and then I put the patch over it, and it's like perfect.
Yep.
Wow.
And it's like it's intricate because you're not exactly putting it on the sensor per se, you're putting it on the tape, and it's like really thin. So yeah, it's
oh yeah, you want to show your arm just in case somebody wants to see what?
Sure. For the culture, I got the brown one. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, so that's one of the options that you have.
Yeah, and the thing is, this is a skin grip, and this is for my Libre, but I had the same adhesive for my Omnipod, which is on my leg, and you can get them clear. Honestly, I used to wear a blue one on campus because like I always was with my sorority, with my friends, and it was just like a fun way to like show diabetes. But as you go to different phases, you start working, you go different places, you might want to change it up. So I'd say have fun with it. Like we said before, it can be kind of intricate, very tedious at times, but there's fun sides to it.
I definitely, it's weird that we use the word fun in diabetes. I think it's the relationships, right? It's meeting people like you and Julia and everybody else in the social media sphere and all the healthcare clinicians that I wouldn't have never had access to or been able to know because of diabetes. Right?
Honestly, how I've heard it is, it's possible for you to be happy with diabetes or unhappy without it. So, that's not going to define who you are and what you are and what you're here to do and what your purpose is.
Yeah.
Agreed. Definitely agree. So if we don't have any more questions, Shay, Julia, thank you so much for spending the last hour with us, because it's one thing to hear about timing range from clinicians. Julia, I know you're a clinician, but
I have multiple roles.
Yeah, from people with diabetes, right? That actually live with it, help other people manage it, researcher, and sometimes we miss those stories that's not edited or anything. So thank you so much for spending time with us. And for those people who may use social, and if your accounts aren't private, Shay, where can people find you on Twitter or Instagram? And Julia, where can people find you?
Definitely. So you can find me on Facebook. I'm just Shay Webb. Or on Instagram, I'm Shay Darnell. So ShayDarnelle _ T1D. And, you can find me on LinkedIn because I'm always posting diabetes related stuff on there because honestly, that's where I connect with a lot of diabetes professionals. So the ones that aren't in my area that I'm like, okay, I kind of want to see what research you're doing, or, I want to see what you have to say about this. So those are the places to find me. And it's interesting you say that before you said what you said, Cherise, because in college I had this professor and I was showing him my CGM and everything. He's like, wow, you're just like walking statistics. And I was in statistics. So I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's go with that.
It's the research excitement with the numbers and the data. But yeah, you can find me. My Twitter name is Dr. Julia, Julia, and then Blan, like the first part of my last name. So Dr. Julia Blanchette. And then on Instagram, I'm Nurse Jebcat. So Nurse, NURSEJEBCAT. Don't ask, long time ago nickname, and I just kept it. And I'm on LinkedIn too, but it sounds like Shay's LinkedIn is more exciting than mine. So
I tried to tag Julia earlier, and I was like, wait.
It didn't let you?
No, I mean not LinkedIn, on Instagram. I'm
on Instagram.
Wait, is this the right one? Like,
it's the Nurse Jebcat. That's Nurse Jebcat. It's me. It's me.
Well, thank you all again, and thank you, Merck and Novo Nordisk, for sponsoring this great conversation on time and range. Also, if you weren't able to listen to the entire recording or event live, I will definitely make sure this will be public and published here and everywhere else. You can find us on YouTube, diaTribe, at diaTribe News on Twitter, Facebook, and also on Instagram at diaTribe. Thank you all so much for spending your evening with us, and we hope to have more events like this in the future. So thank you so much on behalf of myself and the whole diaTribe team. Everybody have a great night and be safe.